The opposite direction of home, the road. Signed Yosemite National Park, 85 miles, curves and splits a field of alfalfa. Heat breaches from the sun's corona, bearing down directly above this agrarian section of earth. The Sierra Nevada is not as clear as I remembered them. Granite monoliths of the planet's evolution stalking a bright and clear sky. Now only the mountain's yellow base is visible in the smog. In my rear view, mirror a man works a field alone along the feet of this mountain.
Mm.
For a moment, I do not notice my foot off the gas, 60 miles per hour slowing to nothing but a mess of color and motion. And the erupting shimmer glosses the hot tar surface of the county road. The man reminds me of another man, hardened in the memory of my grandmother, her father, Daddy Buster, the sharecropper who labored until his hands were black with toil,
Mm.
calloused with the need to feed a wife and 15 children. Once I asked my grandmother for his story, and she said, "No, we can't dwell on the past. No, we didn't suffer too much. God will turn us to salt if we look back at everything we've lost or never had."
Oh my God. This is so beautiful. And I keep thinking about like why we need stories, right? And how we are seeking stories in so many ways, especially like with social media, like, TikTok is now like, oh, story time, right?
Right.
And like when I think about that and I think about this poem, it's like it seems like stories really, especially our personal stories, our family stories, really like affirm us and give us our own personal history.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think the speaker is seeking in that story of the grandfather?
Yeah. I mean, it's such an interesting, if this was sort of like one of the seeking, the longing, the yearning that the speaker has like throughout these poems is like this yearning for something that is has been erased or
Mm,
kept secret. So it's interesting. My grandparents, again, all Southerners from different parts of the South.
mhm.
My paternal grandfather was from Mississippi, a very small town in Mississippi. Like, I'm probably still related to everybody in that town to this day. My other grandfather was from Chattanooga. My One of my grandmothers was from East Texas. The other grandmother was from Aiken, South Carolina, and Gullah Geechee people. And they all sort of found their way um, west to the same community in East Palo Alto Menlo Park, where my parents have known each other since they were 11 and 12. So,
Mm,
and I say all that because with each of my grandparents, they brought their own secrets,
mm,
history, experiences with, Jim Crow and that were like really unspeakable to them. Um, and one of the things that was like, because my this is from my grandmother from East Texas, who had tons of siblings that sort of are like these monoliths in our own family. The way that they speak about their parents is like almost royalty.
mm,
And maybe my grandmother's maybe two generations removed from slavery, and they like know the plantation. We know the plantation where in which we were enslaved on, and like we've been there for a long time. My family's still there. Um, they sort of tell this story of Daddy Buster as the only, like, this kind of like valiant story. He was the only black man in
mm,
the county who could, you know, use a like an electric like a mechanical plow.
mm,
All the other sharecroppers had to like be in the field themselves with like other, with animals doing it by hand, which a lot of people did back in
Mhm.
those days. And so they sort of like tell this story. And they also like that's the only story they tell about him because, he was again tasked with feeding 15 children as a
Mhm.
sharecropper. There was no money. I
Mhm.
mean, my grandparents, my grandmother and her siblings, my great aunts and uncles, every summer with my great grandmother would go and pick cotton to
Mhm.
help the family. I mean, and again, and so like, yeah, so it's this longing, and it's sort of like I want to know the whole story.
Mhm.
I don't want just this like, well, he was this valiant man, yes. But I sort of like am in the tradition of Toni Morrison and like the
Mhm.
side of memory, where it's like I don't want the veil, I want to lift the veil on what
Mhm.
else was there. And this man who struggled racially, economically, all these things, sort of stands like as like a silent figure in our family. And so, yeah, I wanted to know more about that. But like, again, the poem ends with the grandmother sort of saying, like, no, we can't go back there. If we go
Mhm.
back, everything we have will dissolve.
Yeah.
It'll be cast off. So, yeah, it's sort of like me sort of playing with this idea of like, obviously like Lot's wife, but also this idea that some things for some people are too painful to go back to, but I long to understand like what's actually like at stake.
Yeah. I love that biblical reference, because it creates it into this epic, right? It's not like this singular family, but it's this whole thing, right? I love how it, speaking of universal, it brings it to this universal story that we know of, and I love that. But when you're talking, I keep I'm thinking that like even though the stories are painful, it's really important for us to know these stories because it tells us about our history, who we are as like personal, as a family, and as like a country, right? As a nation. And those stories are really important. I'm just not hiding it and not sanitizing it. And I think something about the rawness of that, like even though it's hard, brings things into perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, this is this is my mom gets sick of this part
Mhm.
of me
Mhm.
where I'm like I have to figure this thing out. One of the guiding questions that actually doesn't show up in the book
Mhm.
is how do we unmake ourselves of violence?
Mhm.
Um, and this idea that like I have to like I do in a lot of ways have to turn back and look
Mhm.
or like bear witness to things that were paved over or like hidden or like in some kind of shame thing. I think a lot of my book now that I've like a few years removed from it, it's like dealing with shame. Uh,
Mhm.
Whether that's like shame, the kind of shame that anti-Blackness sort of imposes on Black people, and not shame about being Black, but shame of being like victim to kind of like sheer forces of violence, which are no fault of our own, but like shame about how we then tolerate those violences in our own private lives. And so a lot of it is just me sort of being like, I have to like look at this thing because it's not just like I'm inheriting this like history, these sites of violence. Yeah, but like I also like and I know it's sort of like cliche in a sense, like I also don't want to I don't want to bring that forward with me.
Mhm.
It's so like, yeah, a lot of this is me contending with anti-Black violence, but the kind of the implications for anti-Black violence that then seep into the personal lives of Black folk, uh, and how we sort of shield ourselves or make ourselves sort of like fortify ourselves against these forces that we don't always understand, and how that then makes intimate relationships, sharing stories difficult for us. Um, which, a lot of, older folks, my grandparents included, were like, well, that didn't make, these didn't make me. That didn't make me. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not saying it did, but it's also there,
Yeah.
and it's also something you carry. It's something I carry. It's in my body as it's in your body too.